Well, welcome to this episode of the Zelos Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder, and it's a special edition. That's because this is the 200th episode of the Zelos Podcast. Every week, every Monday, pretty much without fail, we have been delivering one podcast a week with some of the most amazing professionals behind the world of professional sports. Whether it is the physical therapist, the athletic trainer, a performance director, a strength coach, dietitian, nutritionist, mental skills coach, sports psychologist, the list continues on. And I thought, well, rather than having a guest on this week, we might kind of turn the tables a little bit and explain how it is this podcast came to be, a little bit more about myself and the work that I do, and just have it be a little bit different. So, how did this get started? Well, I guess we can thank COVID for that because out here in Santa Cruz, California, one of the first states to go on lockdown that March 16th of 2000, my wife and her administrative assistant in our training facility spent 3 hours that evening transferring all of our services online. So in Santa Cruz County, there were things that were considered essential in regards to business and other businesses that were not. And it turns out that, well, our marijuana dispensaries, our liquor stores, and our donut shops are essential. But when it comes to moving the body, trying to improve upon health and wellness, well, that unfortunately fell short. And we had to keep our doors closed, locked down tight, and keep the lights down. And slowly start to integrate services back. But it was all online, whether we were just keeping ourselves quiet in the studio, locking the doors so no one can see, or doing it from undisclosed locations. We kept our area moving. And well, it just brought about a creative mind, I guess you'll say, creative process. And we found ourselves a little bit of extra time. And so there was an idea that I had about maybe doing a podcast because in the early 2000s here in the surf town of Santa Cruz, I was approached by one of the local radio stations, and they asked if I would be interested in becoming their surf reporter. So every other day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I would call into the radio station and just give little bits of information about the tides and the swell direction, wave heights, and anything within the surf community. And here we are to this day, still doing it. Over 20 years have gone by. I think I'm up now to 22 years of doing the surf report for a local station. And there's an FM dial also, another radio station that I do that every day, Monday through Friday. So I've become known as the surf guy in the pigsty for KPIG radio. That's 107 Oink 5 FM here on the Central Coast. Great radio station if you ever want to tune in to kpig.com. I highly recommend it. Independent radio and some really great music. So I do that. And along the way, I did a couple of radio stations or radio shows, that is. One was called Fathers Are Forever. So I've got two kids. They are now getting ready to, one is graduating high school this December, and the other one's already on her first year of grad school for athletic training. So she'll probably end up being one of my guests I eventually interview on some NFL team, being either assistant or head athletic director. Knowing her, she's probably going to be the head somewhere soon. And my son graduating high school, he's the big wave surfer, and maybe getting him on here as well somewhere down the road. But we did a Fathers Are Forever radio station, a radio show, myself and another fellow. He raised his adult daughter through divorce and co-parenting with the mother of his daughter. And well, my wife and I are still married and still raising our kids. And that was a little while. We did that for a few years. And then another fellow approached me saying, "Hey, let's do a sports talk radio show on this station where we can talk about local sports and nothing in the big world, but just all our local high schools and community colleges and so on." So we did that for a little while, and that was fun. So I have had experience in broadcasting, I guess we'll say. So forward to 2020 here, we've got COVID, and I've got a little extra time. So I started thinking about a podcast. I developed one called the Rock Fit Files, and before I knew it, I had so many guests lined up week after week that I had run out of space. So I thought, well, some of these guests could be more along the lines of talking about the professionals behind pro sports, and hence here we are, the Zealous Podcast. And since that time in 2020, we are now into our 16th season, usually about 12 or 13 episodes a season every week. And when you add it up, 4 years later, basically, we are now at our 200th episode. And if you're new to Zealous, I would recommend going back into the archives because we have had some of the most amazing guests, some really well known and some not so known, but nonetheless, they are the ones that are helping to create a strong, vibrant environment for athletes, whether it's Division One, whether it's the major leagues of NFL, the NBA, National Hockey League, MLB, or for that matter, MLS, or Division One college. We've got some amazing people that have come on. Some of them to note, like Al Vermeil. If you don't know Al, you should. His brother Dick Vermeil was an NFL coach. He coached the Philadelphia Eagles in the 80s. And then Al, well, in the 80s, he was with the San Francisco 49ers. He left his high school coaching career to become the strength coach for the Niners when they went on their Super Bowl kind of victory tour of the 80s. And he didn't stop there. He went with the Chicago White Sox a little bit later. And then from Chicago White Sox, he transferred over to the Bulls with Michael Jordan in the 90s. And he's got himself more championship rings than he could probably hold on one hand. But Al Vermeil's one. Just go through the list of the people we've had: Gary Ward, Gary Gray, Mike Boyle. Then you've got Sue Falzoni, who was the first female athletic trainer in Major League Sports. She just got herself a World Series ring with the LA Dodgers. That's where she cut her teeth in major sports. And she set up the return to performance program with the Houston Texans last season. And now she's back with the Dodgers on their World Series championships. So we've had so many professionals across the spectrum. It's just been remarkable. And it doesn't stop there, whether it's Premier League soccer or Chinese basketball, women's basketball, rugby sevens, the America's Cup team, Emirates, New Zealand. The strength coach, Adam Story, came on many times ago. And it's just been a really fun adventure. And honestly, if you have been listening, this podcast has been a really selfish pursuit on my part. I get to have a friend or colleague for 45 minutes to a 50, maybe almost to an hour, asking them questions that I'm curious about, learning more in my trade and in my profession. So usually with the Zealous podcast, we kick off with what we call the superhero origin story. And where did these people come from? And I guess maybe it's my turn to give you a little bit of information about myself. Grew up outside of Boston in the house of four generations of my family grew up in. My grandmother was raised in it, my father and myself, and dates back into my great grandparents. Just outside Boston and in the same hometown that Mike Boyle's been living in, Reading, Massachusetts. In fact, I'm kind of a little bit miffed at Mike. I thought I was going to be the most well-known strength coach to come from Reading, Massachusetts. But as it turns out, that bugger moved into my hometown, and I think he takes the title easily enough. So after high school, went out to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst and floundered there, not knowing what the heck was I going to study. And I would spin the major wheel every semester, and whatever it landed on, those were the courses I was taking. It seemed whether it was timber harvesting, basketball, ballet, human performance, Shakespeare, graphic design, fine arts, oceanography, computer cartography. It was just all over the place until the advisor said, we really like people to graduate after a certain period of time. And looking at your transcript, I think the best bet for you right now is to take the foreign language requirements, a couple major British writers, and you could finish with an English literature degree. So that's what I did. And then within a certain amount of time, I was done there. And lo and behold, I've used that degree, but not to the extent that I was expecting. Maybe I would become a teacher, an English teacher or something, which didn't appeal to me at all. So I went west. I got a job right after college in Yellowstone National Park. I worked in the Old Faithful area, lived in a log cabin. Growing up was outdoor adventure sports. So one weekend every month from about age 10 to 20, I was in the backwoods of New England, whether it was rock climbing, cross country skiing and camping in the snow, or whitewater canoeing or rafting or kayaking, or just going out and hiking in the backwoods. I've gone across the northern Maine Canadian wilderness, the Allagash and St. John rivers, spent many summers up there just getting in the backcountry. So going out to Yellowstone just seemed like the appropriate thing to do. And while I was there, I had some college friends that were traveling west, and they said, "Yeah, we're going to California." Said, "Oh, do you have jobs?" They said, "No, we don't know what we're going to do. Where are you going to end up? We don't know. We don't even have a place to live." Well, that was one of the craziest thoughts that I had ever heard of. So I said, "Okay, well, wherever you land, when I'm done here in Wyoming, I'll come out and visit you." And it just so happened, because of their decisions, they landed in Santa Cruz. And Santa Cruz, for those of you that may not be familiar with California geography, Santa Cruz is on the northern cusp of Monterey Bay, with Pebble Beach and Carmel on the southern cusp with Monterey. And then you've got the Big Sur highlands, just beautiful, majestic California coastline. North of us by about an hour is San Francisco. And for the surf world, Mavericks is just south of San Francisco. So it's nestled in Half Moon Bay, just about 45 to 50 minutes north of Santa Cruz. And over the hill of the Santa Cruz Mountains, we've got Silicon Valley, San Jose, Santa Clara, and so on. And then if you were to get in your car and drive about 5 or 6 hours south, you'd eventually get to Los Angeles. A couple hours south of that, you could be in San Diego and then to the Mexican border. So we're on what we call the central coast of California. And when I got here, it was the 1 year anniversary of what they call the Loma Prieta earthquake, which was the one that occurred in 1989 on October 17th during the World Series between San Francisco Giants and the Oakland Athletics. And it was about 5:15 that evening that the earthquake struck. And these days, as the crow flies, it's about a mile away from my house. Uh, so anyway, I got here to Santa Cruz and I fell in love with it. It was in the middle of October on the 1 year anniversary of the earthquake, and I pretty much didn't look back. I went back to the Northeast, struggled to try and find work back there. Didn't know Mike Boyle at the time, although things might be different had I known him then. But I decided, well, I'm just going to pack up my duffel bag, jump on a Greyhound bus, and go couch surf on my friend's couch until I could get my feet down on the ground and figure out what to do. And I've been here ever since. And it just so happened there was a health club nearby after working in restaurants most of my early adult life and getting myself through school by working in restaurants and a line cook. There was a health club that was looking for employees, and I was working out quite avidly at the time. And I really liked that form of procrastination. It got me through my studies in school. It didn't help my studies, but every time there was something that I needed to do school wise, I would just go to the gym and work out. So, with all that workout experience, working in a health club seemed to be ideal. Got hired there in 1992. And within just a few months, there was a guy that came up from Orange County, the Los Angeles area, with the idea of starting a personal training department in this health club. Now, at the time, personal training wasn't even thought of. It was just something that was down in LA or New York, but it was slowly starting to expand. And I was chosen amongst a couple other exercise instructors in the health club to try to become one of their personal trainers. And that is, I guess, the first chapter in this. So after the personal training program got up and going, and within a short time, joining the NSCA and becoming a CSCS in '93, a few years later, I broke away from the health club and opened up my own training facility. And that was March of 96. And so here we are, coming up on our 29th anniversary. And a lot has kind of happened in that time. And I guess the biggest thing that I kind of want to share is like the things that I learned over the course of time was more about program design and what a body or a person really needs. Because in the early portion of personal training, the programs we were creating, they were designing, were mainly bodybuilding. It was bench press, the chest fly machine, incline press. We might be breaking it up into chest and arms or chest, shoulders, triceps, whatever the breakdown was, legs and abs on one day and back and buys another, and so on. It was very much geared toward bodybuilding because in the gym, that's where all the exercises were borrowed from. So when gyms were starting, health clubs were forming in the 80s, they had to start creating movements. Well, the movements that were being done through Arnold and Dave Draper's day, the bodybuilding of the 60s and 70s was all about isolation for the most part. There was powerlifting, of course. So you had bench press and the squat and the deadlift. And then somewhere along the way, especially around 2000, with Greg Glassman and his CrossFit program, which incidentally started at the same health club here in Santa Cruz. I've known Greg for a long time. And jokingly, I say, well, I left that health club and went down one street and worked with aging surfers. And he went down the other end of the street and started an organization that would eventually be about a $40 million operation or more. Anyway, the programs of the 90s were all about isolating and increasing the hypertrophy of muscle for mainly aesthetic purposes. And if you were really good at one particular lift, chances are that was going to be on your program or some variation of it for a long, long time to come. So women were typically doing abs, glutes, thighs. Guys were doing chest, back, arms, skipping leg day, not doing cardio, that type of thing. So those were the kind of the programs we were designing in the 90s, in the early 90s. And functional fitness and Gary Gray and his matrix wasn't really getting a foothold at that time. So my clients were coming in and training with me, and slowly over time, they'd start complaining about these orthopedic concerns, like itises, tendonitis, bursitis, low back issues. My neck's bugging me when I do this lift. I feel it in my knee when I do this. Without knowing anything, I would just avoid those exercises they felt pain in. I mean, that's the natural way of doing it. Little did I know, it was only a couple of years later, probably in 95, that I began to understand the importance of structural alignment and how by encouraging somebody to be more aligned, there's better joint spacing, there's more muscular balance, there's better function, optimal performance. And when I found out that the programs we were developing at that time were almost the antithesis of trying to bring the body back into alignment. Yes, we were trying to go for like symmetry aesthetically, but in terms of movement symmetry, it just wasn't happening. In fact, what was happening is more imbalances, more reinforcement of one movement pattern over a whole bunch of others. And that developed restriction in areas. So other areas needed to compensate. And over the course of repetitive stress, which is really what working out is where doing strength training with how many repetitions, how many sets, and over with these same patterns, those orthopedic issues began to develop. So once I understood that, man, I had to pretty much unlearn a whole bunch of stuff that I thought to be, the cat's meow, and relearn how to view a person in regards to their structural alignment. So doing posture assessments like I do today have been going on for me for 30 years, coming up on 30 years. 1995, I really started getting into it. And so my first mentor was all about understanding the three planes of motion, which was something that was fairly new to consider, the sagittal frontal transverse plane, and trying to figure out where all their load-bearing joints lined up with the most ideal position. So we have an ideal idea of posture, correct posture, though no one is ever really going to assume that. At least we have something we can compare people to. So we've got the ideal and we compare people to it, find out where they deviate from those areas, and that gives you more insight as to what they really need. They need to be drawn back into better alignment. Well, here are some movements that can do that. And the programs began to be infused with those type of movements while still doing strength exercises, but getting away from the isolation. And several years went by and really trying to pursue that till 99. And then my English major from UMass started to come into play. I've been surfing for, well, since the mid 90s or so. Grew up body surfing on the coast of New Hampshire in the summer, but putting a board underneath my feet was a totally wild concept, and I fell in love with it right from the get-go. So within about 5 years of really surfing almost daily, I had asked a client whose dad invented the wetsuit if there was anything like a strength conditioning guidebook for surfers. And he said not that he could recall, and he had his thumb on the pulse of surf. So I started creating a book. I wrote one called Fit to Surf, Surfer's Guide to Strength Conditioning. And I think it came out in 99 or 2000. So I guess it was 25 years ago. I wrote my first book, self-published it, and then a publishing company bought the rights to it and said they wanted to do a series. So next I did Fit to Paddle for kayakers and rafters, canoeists, and so on. And lo and behold, I found out that paddlers actually do those things to get in shape. They didn't want a guidebook to get in shape to go do it. So, although it was published and everything, it didn't do nearly as well as the surf book did. And then the next year, I did one for skiing and snowboarding because, well, we've got Lake Tahoe within a few hours' drive here, and snowboarding is something that really is a good carryover between all the other adventure sports that I had done. So I had a series, the Fit to Surf, the Fit to Paddle, Fit to Ski and Snowboard. And when I look back, I just kind of, I won't cringe, but what I knew at that time, the books were good. What I know now, I don't recommend anybody buying them necessarily. There's good mobility drills, there's some strength exercises, but the way the programs are designed were not the ones that I really would do today. So, somewhere in that realm, about 2005, a colleague came to town and started renting space out of my studio, and he turned me on to perform better. And I gotta say, I've just loved what that company has done for the fitness industry, and not just in regards to the equipment that they offer and the innovations within those pieces of equipment that have come out, but the educational platform they have developed for the rehab strength conditioning community. I don't know if anything can compare as close to that. So I would go every year down to Long Beach, California, at the beginning of the summer and spend 3 days learning from some of the most amazing speakers, whether it was Gary Gray, I've already mentioned Mike Boyle and Sue Falzoni, but of course, Gray Cook and Lee Burton, they had come out with a functional movement screen, which I was beginning to use and really dove in deep because, I mean, let's face it, in the 90s, what did we have for fitness assessments? There was a sit and reach test and a whole bunch of RM testing. How much could you bench press, leg press, maybe squat, the sitting toe touch, the step test, and body fat with calipers. None of that was telling a movement specialist or personal trainer the level of ability or quality of movement for their clients. It was just, yeah, how much can you exert? And then we tried to extrapolate a whole bunch of information from that. So I don't use the RM testing very much anymore because, well, I've got other means of doing things. I do still do the posture assessments, but what I began to understand is, well, the body is meant to move a certain way. And through Perform Better, I got connected with Gary Gray and the Gray Institute and got certified with him and a number of different things that he offers. And it wasn't until, 2013 or so that I went to his chain reaction seminar in San Diego. I think it was in September, and it was probably like his 20th or 25th anniversary at that time of teaching the chain reaction, which, if you haven't, I highly recommend. But it's in essence watching the chain reaction of a single footstep all the way up the body, which was fascinating because here I was looking at a static structure, but I hadn't taken any consideration into the dynamic nature of how that static structure would therefore go and move. And I wasn't paying attention to the anything below the ankles. I was mainly looking at the knees, the hips and pelvis, the spine, the shoulders, the head, to get an understanding of where their body was. Looking back, I just shake my head going, how can you not pay attention to the feet? So Gary Gray brought me into the fold with that, with the chain reaction. And it just so happened I came home just blown away, light bulb moment after light bulb moment, understanding closed chain biomechanics truly for the first time of getting an understanding, a basic understanding of it. And I just happened to be on social media, and a colleague who was a trainer in Vegas, he put out this excerpt of a book all about movement and chain reaction, biomechanics, and this and the foot and how it was relating to the rest of the body. So it was just an extension of what I had just learned the previous weekend with the Gray Institute. And it just so happened this book was called What the Foot, and the author was another Gary Ward. And I just immediately connected with it, sent away for a copy. Had it sent to England because that's where he was living in London. And he sent it back through the post. I got it not too long after, started devouring the pages, and I still to this day will pick it up and get something new out of it. Very lay terms, but incredible information. And he put an insert inside that book, little handwritten note, just thanking me for purchasing his book and saying that if I was interested in learning more, then perhaps I might consider taking one of his courses that he had just began developing a year or two before that. And at that time, owning a business and having a wife with two very young children, I think my son was 6 at the time, my daughter 10. I don't think I was going to convince my wife that I needed to take a trip across the pond, so to speak, and spend 4 or 5 days in London without her. So, as it turned out, though, fortunately, he was bringing his course to the United States for the very first time in March of 2014. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that I needed to take it, especially considering that the course was going to be offered just north of San Francisco. It was almost like, too many planets are getting aligned here. I can't ignore this. So that's what I did. I took the first anatomy and motion course offered in the United States in March of 2014. And then anytime he came back into the US or Canada, I was there for another workshop. And we developed a sincere friendship and camaraderie. And he became my mentor, well, I would say for the past 10 years. And the cool thing is what Gary did was he, as far as I know, the first person to ever do so, he figured out what every articulation, every joint in the body did through the entire gait cycle. He broke up the gait cycle into 7 distinct phases where joint actions were very distinct and different from others. And he laid it out between the sagittal, the frontal, and the transverse plane. And he calls it the flow motion model. There are hundreds upon hundreds of joint actions occurring through the entire gait cycle, which, by the way, lasts for less than a second, zero point 0.6 to 0.85 seconds or so on average. And it just hit me that all these movement screens I had been doing were fantastic. However, they weren't showing me what the ideal was in regards to how a person moves through space. I had the ideal of how they stood against gravity, ideal posture, and I had something I could compare against to find out what was missing. But now, understanding closed chain biomechanics in terms of the human gait cycle and looking at it with such a microscope and at the same time, a wide angle lens, and knowing what ideally should occur for optimal movement, there is one perfect way that the body should land on planet Earth, and there's one perfect and completely polar opposite way that the body should behave when it pushes off the planet. And I would compare my clients to that ideal. And that's what I've been doing to this day: posture assessment and understanding how they move through space. I'm not going to call it gait analysis because I, I just don't want to call it that. I think that anybody who says they do gait analysis is kind of missing the boat, because you've got 360 joints that move, most of them which move through three-dimensional space in terms of less than a second, and you're going to analyze all that. You'll see the big buckets, which are probably the good thing to look at, but you may not catch all of it. And so, with this knowledge of posture realignment, neuromuscular reeducation, gait mechanics, closed chain biomechanics, and the ideal way a human should move, I now had the information I really needed to truly assess human movement and the fight against gravity. And along the way, also studying with Dr. Eric Cobb and the Z Health educational system to understand the interaction between the central nervous system of the brain and its interplay between the rest of the body. So, studying visual drills and assessments, vestibular drills and assessments, and for that matter, proprioception and the type of work that he does has been more comprehensive and putting on an additional layer. So, as I accumulated all this knowledge, well, I thought maybe I'll just put out a second edition of the surf book, because after all, it's been about 20 years at that time. And this was in 2019. But as I wrote it, my wife started looking at it and she's like, this is not a surf book. This is something completely different. This is the method that you use when you're working with your athletes and your clients and all the people that are coming in to see you with chronic pain that haven't been solved, which is really a big part of what I do. I love solving puzzles, and the human frame is one of the best puzzles of all. All the initial insults and injuries that a person will experience in their life gets held inside their frame, and their brain unconsciously creates patterns to avoid any perceived threat. And whether it's a physical injury, a mental, emotional trauma, whatever it is, those things can eventually create orthopedic concerns, physical pain. And that's the stuff I love doing, whether it's with an athlete or if it's with general population. That's the cool stuff. So this book that was supposed to be a second edition of a surf book turned into Return to Center, which it's not an Elvis Presley song. Return to Center is all about realigning the body and recovering from pain and achieving optimal performance by selecting the gym exercises, the foam rolling targets, the myofascial release targets, the mobility drills, and the strength moves that an individual needs based on where they are in the moment. And it's been a game changer for me, as well as for all the trainers that I teach and educate. So these days, after 30 years of, as I jokingly say, teaching people how to lift heavy stuff up and down and counting to 10, um, I don't really do much personal training so much as educating health and fitness professionals as well as medical staff. So a lot of my guests that I've had on here, they have had an experience with a lot of the educational courses or workshops that I have created, some online, some in person, because they see that this is potentially one of the things that are missing in regards to program design. There's a reason why that person has a recurring injury, why that individual tore their ACL, or they've got meniscus damage, or there's some herniation in the lower back, especially when there wasn't contact, that these things just accumulated over time. So by using this kind of methodology, I guess would say, understanding the posture, structural alignment, and then how do they take that resting posture and move through space, comparing that to the ideal, their body gives them the information it needs. So I've been really blessed to be invited to a whole bunch of different sports teams these days, and there's more lining up right now, which is nice. But um, whether it be the Yukon women's and men's basketball team just a month or so ago, loving seeing them play, or if it's some of our local squads around here, these are the things that I love doing. And because of that, I love finding out more about what the pros are doing within the world of sports. So I won't say I'm at a change or a crossroads necessarily with my career, more or less. Um, I'm in a chrysalis, like a butterfly, I guess. I'm in that cocoon, about to emerge into something a little bit differently. You'll be seeing some products coming out in the very near future, some with Perform Better. I'll be collaborating with other presenters and doing some really fun workshops and courses. I will be presenting at the national conferences, continuing to present for Perform Better and the NSCA. Hopefully, I'll be at IDEA World Fitness Conference next July in Sacramento, and then offer my own courses. So I guess this would be the plug. If you're if you're a gym owner and you've got staff and you want to provide them with added value and you want to keep them and you care for them, then I'm happy to go to your location and offer a continuing education workshop, whether it's a half a day, 2 days or more. It doesn't really matter. If you're a physical therapy unit, if you're got a group of athletic trainers, or if you've got a sports team and you're a director of performance or your head athletic trainer, we've got courses for chiropractors as well as they'll be good for the athletic trainer, the physical therapist, the strength coach, personal trainer. And that's all continuing education approved courses that we already have. But going back to the feet, that was, I think, the feet and the brain, both ends of the body, are the final frontiers right now in terms of strength, conditioning, movement, understanding how people move. I mean, the brain is the overall governing body. How much are we knowing truly about how the brain creates movement and how movement feeds the brain? That's something I highly recommend pursuing. And honestly, this a slight plug for the Z Health educational system. If you happen to go there and you want to take their essentials course or dive in deeper with the many levels of coursework that they do, then do me a favor, just mention my name when they're asking who sent you. It just it's a nice little thing to do. Just gives them an understanding that I'm helping. Um, Also, the feet, Gary Ward, Anatomy and Motion, all of his coursework, you can't go wrong with that. He just has tremendous amounts of information that aren't common knowledge. But the more you understand it, the more it becomes common to your knowledge base, and you get to see bodies move in a completely different way than you used to. In fact, you can't unsee it. So exploring foot mechanics and how it relates all the way up the kinetic chain, exploring neurobiology or motor neurology and seeing how that filters down. Yeah, it gets me up in the morning and keeps me going because every person is unique. And every time somebody walks in the door, they're coming in with their own individual story. Some of the things they remember. And the fun part is when they start moving their bodies, memories are triggered. And they may not have told you their entire health history, but you start exploring movements and just seeing how the pelvis or the rib cage moves. And the next thing you know, they're saying, oh, that reminds me, I forgot to tell you. Yeah, when I was 5 years old, I got hit by a car, or whatever the case may be. There's some things that just don't percolate up to the surface until the body begins moving. So I hope you've enjoyed this kind of different episode of the podcast. Maybe it gives you a little bit better understanding. And for those of you that sometimes watch the video version on YouTube or perhaps Spotify, maybe I finish with this. My podcast bay here, this is my office. It's literally a broom closet. It's our facility here. And in the other room is where we do the majority of our training. But this at one point in time was literally a broom closet. And so when we moved in here in the midst of COVID and relocated from our previous location, my wife built a really nice office right behind the front desk. She's our director of operations and my backbone and my organizer and queen of logistics. She looked at this room. She's like, yeah, you can have it. And so I was relegated to the broom closet, but it turns out it's a pretty nice room. So in my backdrop, it's really a backdrop, by the way. I've got my single fin fun board up here, my surfboard shaped by Nick Palandrani, Source Surfboards, an exquisite artist, an amazing shaper right here in Santa Cruz. He shapes a lot of my boards. Another board, but hanging on the wall here is a skateboard deck, a wooden skateboard deck, and it's an original Greg Knoll skateboard deck. For those that aren't familiar with who Greg Knoll is, he was one of the first big wave surfers at Waimea back in the 60s. They called him the Bull. So I got that. A little surf poster from a Memorial Day contest here in Santa Cruz just a couple of years ago. And then I've got my Indian clubs, of course, my pound and a half and 3 pounds, my globe. Love kind of looking where places are, always interested in geography. And then I've got my artwork on the wall, my photographs. And I've got the Julian Edelman catch against the Atlanta Falcons in the Super Bowl framed up on the wall there. I've got my Fred Lynn catch in 1975. This was game 6 of the World Series. I was just a wee lad, but that's what got me into sports. And the Red Sox, well, they crushed my heart that year, just being about 8 or 9 years old. And then I've got Malcolm Butler crushing the hearts of Seahawk fans everywhere with that final interception at the Super Bowl with only about 20 something seconds left in the game, getting it from Lockett. I got my books, and then I've got, of course, my Super Bowl trophy footballs here from the Patriots. Can't get away from New England sports. And behind me, you don't often see it, kind of hidden behind my head, is a framed photo of the Boston Garden before they tore it down and rebuilt the TD Bank North Center. But on that photo, Larry Bird is running down the court, going against the Pacers of all places, of all teams. And that's really about it. I hope you guys have had a fun time listening, and don't fret. Next week, we've got another amazing guest in the world of professional sports, and we'll keep coming at you. This is episode 200. And for all the thousands and thousands of listeners and those tens of thousands of download and the people that keep coming back week after week, I just want to say thank you so much. I love to get comments. You can always email me through my website, or you can throw a comment or review up on YouTube or wherever you can find it. Follow me on Instagram. I love connecting. I love talking shop. And I just love that we can do this and continue on. So thank you for listening. Have yourself a great week and stay strong and healthy.